Good morning, everybody. We are going to get started. Thank you for your patience while we waited to get things, make sure everybody had an opportunity to get here and get settled. I will take this opportunity to thank the team from Spotlight Delaware for pulling this together for us. It's wonderful to have such a nice full room, especially right after coming back from the holiday. So kudos to our team for putting on an event that obviously is something that folks really want to have a conversation about. I want to start just by welcoming everyone to Navigating Growth, Effective Land Use Discussions. My name is Allison Taylor Levine, and I'm the founder and CEO of Spotlight Delaware. We are really thrilled that you're all here with us this morning. A quick question, how many of you are already familiar with Spotlight Delaware? Fantastic, I love it. So Spotlight, just briefly, Spotlight is a new independent collaborative nonprofit newsroom, and we just started publishing in February of this year. Our news is completely free to the public. There are no paywalls. There are no subscription rates because we believe that everyone needs and deserves to have access to high quality local news and information. We publish on our website, spotlightdelaware.org, and in 3 weekly email newsletters. We will be expanding to 5 days a week in the new year. Our coverage is statewide, based on extensive research and ongoing community listening. We are currently focused on covering government accountability, education, and land use. And that last area is obviously the focus of our discussion for today. We do have a few articles. We had some articles printed out about land use, but I think that they might all be gone. So I will invite you to check out our website, spotlightdelaware.org, and look at the land use section for those particular articles. Spotlight Delaware's mission is to engage, empower, and connect Delawareans through local news and information. And there's no better way to connect Delawareans than by gathering them together to consider and discuss key issues, and that's why we're here today. I'm very excited about our discussion today because, as we all know, land use decisions affect our quality of life. How we navigate Delaware's growth has implication for the growth of our economy, access to housing, the environment, transportation, healthcare, education, and more. While conversations about growth are often positioned as development versus conservation, our goal today is for our conversations to be different, to be less polarized, more nuanced, more complicated. We offer this as an opportunity for us all to learn more about how land use decisions are made, the many factors that are being considered in those decisions, and how we can participate in those decision-making processes effectively and productively. So here's how we're going to work today. We're going to have 2 panels featuring an impressive array of planners, advocates, and developers, moderated by members of the Spotlight Delaware editorial team. Each panel will last about an hour, and we'll have 10 or 15 minutes at the end of each one for questions from all of you. And then we'll have a brief pause between the 2 panels to shift personnel, and I'll be back at the end to close us out. Thank you again for being with us today. And with that, I'd like to invite Nick Stonecipher and the participants in our first panel, Improving the Land Use Policy Process, a roundtable with planning officials. Nick, where's Nick? Oh, there he is. Okay, thank you guys.
Everyone, is this thing on? Is it on? Can you hear? Okay, sweet. Well, how's everybody doing? My name is Nick Stonecipher. I am Spotlight Delaware's land use reporter, and we're here today to talk about Delaware's state planning process. A little bit about me. Joined Spotlight Delaware in June, just graduated from Penn State. And yeah, been here ever since. Love the work that we do, and yeah. So, but this is not about me. This is about land use. So, I'm gonna go around the proverbial line here. Have everyone introduce themselves. You know, where they're working, how they got to where they are, and kind of yeah. So we'll start with Mr. Edgell. If you want to introduce yourself, your background.
Sure. Thank you, Nick. Hi, everybody. I'm David Edgell. I'm the director of the Office of State Planning Coordination. How did I get here? I drove from Dover. It was a nice drive. Beautiful morning. So our office, the Office of State Planning Coordination, we work with the 60 local governments in Delaware, which include 3 counties, 57 municipalities, as well as all of our state agencies, of which there are many, to help coordinate land use planning. And it's important in Delaware, particularly because in Delaware, our state government provides a lot of the infrastructure and services that are normally provided by larger local governments in other states. For instance, roads are mostly DelDOT roads, over 90%. The state funds schools. The state funds state police, which patrols most of Sussex County, other than the town. So these things are things that it really matters where and how growth is occurring. So through our local government comprehensive plans and our preliminary land use service process, we try to work with our local governments and the developers to make sure everything works well. So is that what you were looking for, Nick? All right.
All right, Mr. Rothwell.
Yes, thank you. I'm Jeremy Rothwell. I'm the planning director for the town of Smyrna. I've been there, been in that office for about 5.5 years or so. I am originally from Cecil County, Maryland. My family's been on the Delmarva Peninsula for a long time, been landowners on both sides of the state line. We do have that arbitrary state line which goes down the middle of a peninsula. And I've worked, I actually started out working in the Maryland General Assembly. I did that for about 5 years back in the 2000s. Went to graduate school at University of Delaware for planning. And I've worked as a planner both in Talbot County, Maryland, and I've worked as a planner in Harrington, Delaware, and the town of Smyrna. And I've been a citizen on different planning boards on the Maryland side as well. So,
And Mr. Whitehouse.
Thank you, Nick. Good morning, everyone. Can you all hear me? My name's Jamie Whitehouse. I'm the Planning and Zoning Director for Sussex County. A short introduction. I consider myself a career planner in that I've always done planning for my entire career, and I don't know how to do anything else. So from the moment I graduated, I started working in a local planning office, and I've done that in a variety of roles on both sides of the Atlantic my entire career. I've been working for Sussex County since 2017, and essentially my role is the same here as it was when I worked in the United Kingdom as a planner, and that involves facilitating the process, is what I would call it. Is that our role as staff is to essentially implement planning policy, and that takes a variety of roles. That involves preparing applications, processing land use applications, and taking them through the public engagement process. That involves noticing folks and making sure that Delaware law is followed when we notice an application, and that involves very precise noticing requirements. You'll see our yellow signs out in public, and we're responsible for making sure that happens and that folks are engaged appropriately. In terms of day-to-day implementation, we also involved in enforcement and implementation. But believe it or not everyone complies with the rules, and occasionally we have to investigate and we have to get involved in that. On a more strategic level, working with David's office is one of the most critical things that we do, is that for large-scale applications, and especially anything more than 50 dwelling units, we're required to engage before the application really comes in as an application. We must make sure the applicant goes through the state review process, and that is an invaluable tool. What we learn as part of that process shapes the application and ultimately shapes the decision. Is that we might learn of contamination, or we might learn of transportation implications, or there might be some unusual constraints on a parcel that really are critical in determining that application. And then once that's complete, we process the application, and involves governing engagement with the public. And engaging with the public involves listening. I'd say the number one thing we do as planners is listen. Is because you gain great intel and great information from the public, and all of that gets married together, and the application then goes through its public hearing process, which you'll see us assisting and attending in the public meetings. But in short, that's what we do as planners. I'd say that we spend more time listening than we do talking. So on that note, I'll stop.
Awesome.
Thank
And
you.
then before we get into the questions here, Charuni Padibanda was slated to be here, but she couldn't make it today. She's Newcastle County's land use director. So, but yeah, okay. So starting off, we're going to kind of talk about kind of on the note of listening, how do you pay attention to community-wide needs? You know, in your processes, how are you thinking about the community kind of at the start? And then anyone feel free to jump into that.
I'm happy to start with this one. It flows neatly from what I was just saying. Is that I think that the tool, being a planner, involves listening and public engagement. And you must engage with the public, and you must have your fingers on the pulse of what is going on in your communities and what the direction of travel is. On a strategic level, that involves knowing what's happening with your population. So listening to state agencies and the public, and then balancing. Planning is all about balancing competing needs and competing interests. As planners, we serve the public interest. So you have to know what the public interest is, and you have to know the direction of travel. I think the best tool for doing that in practice is the comprehensive plan. And for those who are unfamiliar, all the counties and all municipalities are required to have a comprehensive plan in place. And this document serves as a blueprint. This document is the written guide which everyone follows. But it's not something we just pluck out of the air. It takes years to update a comprehensive plan. It involves coordination with the public, listening to the public, inviting written comment, verbal comment, having public workshops, public meetings. It takes years. And then that process has to be condensed and goes through a crucible process, and the end result is the comprehensive plan. And plans are not static. They can and do change over time to reflect changing needs and changing interests. But I think that the tool, the comprehensive planning process, to answer your question, Nick, that document and the process that exists to create that document is the process of listening to the public. Because you engage everyone. In Sussex County, for example, we tour around the county. We go to the different population centres. We have public workshops. We invite written comment. We receive thousands of comments. And all of that has to be condensed and processed and reviewed, and the end result is that comprehensive plan, which we then follow and implement. So.
Yeah, I'm glad, Jamie, you mentioned the comprehensive plan, because that's what I was going to say as well. You know, planning in Delaware is delegated to our local government jurisdictions, and as Jamie mentioned, you know, all local governments have comprehensive plans, and you know, you're going to hear a lot about the process, and day to day you see process. You know, subdivisions are proposed, a rezoning is proposed, and it goes through, as Jamie mentioned, a very legalistic, you know, checklist step of processes. But really, the place where the citizens of a community and the residents of a community have a real voice is through that comprehensive planning process, which our office is structured in that we have 3 circuit rider planners. One focuses on each county. The county governments or larger governments, they have paid staff like Jamie. They have, you know, resources to hold these outreach sessions, often hire consultants. A lot of times our smaller communities don't have the same, you know, level of staff and resources, and our office can be an assistance there. We help with data. We can help with the public outreach process to help them draw out those conversations in their communities. I also want to point out a sort of version of planning that we can do and have done multiple places in the state, which is very helpful, which is really what we call master planning, which is after you've done your comprehensive plan, listen to your community, set broad goals and policy objectives and initiatives and implementation measures, and you know, that can be, you know, kind of a general overview, and then the local government land use regulations, which you've heard of, zoning pretty much is what that is. It's the regulations for what what can be done on a parcel. You know, that gets put in place, but in between those two, there can be a real community conversation about how are we going to implement this plan in this area and achieve the goals we set out to do? Not just looking at the land use, which might be residential, but down to the, you know, does that area have a transportation network that is sufficient to handle that? Does it have an open space network that's going to protect our natural environment? Does it have the utilities that are going to be needed to make that development a successful development? And you know, if you know that master planning process, you know, when it engages the community, which the ones that we've done really can take, you know, a year to 3 years of real you know, hard community conversations about what we want that area to become and how it's going to work together. At the end of the day, that's something that's really helpful not only for the community but also the development community, because they know where they can go and what they're going to be, what the expectations are, and what they can do. So that is, to me, a great tool. Whereas without doing that, I think sometimes it just gets wrapped up too much in the process of one development, as opposed to that sort of broader cumulative look of how this area is going to grow and change. So I'll end with that and give it to Jeremy, because I know, and we did a master plan, a corridor plan with the town of Smyrna
In 2012.
12. So that was a little while ago, but again, it was a great process.
Yeah. So I've worked on 4 comprehensive plans, and both as a citizen and as a planner. I've been on both sides of and engaging the public is tough. Jamie mentioned, you have to plan for the public interest. I have 7 council members and a mayor. What is that public interest? Being able to decipher what the public interest is a very difficult balancing act. And as a planner, I have to make judgment choices and achieve and strive for a balance in a community. And I need to be able to represent the interest of the people that show up to meetings and the people that don't show up to meetings. Because the people that show up to meetings are not, having done this for 12, 15 years, the people that show up to meetings are not representative of the community as a whole. And it's very important to recognize that on a whole number of levels. Some of the things that that governments can do. I had the difficulty of doing our Smyrna's comprehensive plan. Our last one was actually completed during COVID, and obviously that's a difficult undertaking to be able to get public. We were able to do about 8 to 9 months worth of planning work before COVID, and then doing during COVID. One thing that one of our previous town managers instituted was what's called a Thursday Tidbits, where we send emails out to all of our utility customers. We have about right around 6,000 utility customers, and we use that as a mechanism to be able to reach residents of the community, along with Facebook. But the Thursday Tidbits is a much more effective, at least we found, if we need people to show up to a meeting, that's a more effective tool to be able to get out to get the word out to attend a public meeting and the such. We live in a representative government. Okay, so there's no means for us to be able to poll each and every member of the community. Okay, so we go through the mechanisms that are in place using the Planning Commission. If you have a Chamber of Commerce, if you have a Main Street Board, working with your local departments are incredibly important, whether that's your town engineer, whether that's your electric department, whether any of the other utility providers are incredibly important in the planning process, because it's not just about denoting colors on a map, and it's not just about denoting density. It's about, do you have the requisite utilities to be able to serve any of these colors on a map? Okay, and what's the cost to that community? That has to be looked at holistically as part of that comprehensive plan process. One thing that, having worked in Maryland, one thing that I think Delaware does do better is that the comprehensive plan in the state of Delaware has the force of law, meaning that it specifies those parcels, from a transparency standpoint, it specifies those parcels which are eligible for annexation or not. Okay, and at that, the land use designation that they're permitted to be annexed under, okay, which also should inform the density provision. So from a transparency perspective for the members of the public, for elected officials, and for developers, which is very important, is to give transparency to those developers, I think that's a very important mechanism, and I think that's something that Delaware gets right, okay? Some of the other things, David touched on master plans. Master plans are very important, but I want to even delve a little bit. The comprehensive plan is the 10,000-foot view of what a community wants to be when it grows up. There's a lot of facets. There's chapters in everything. There's chapters, everything from historic preservation to economic development to parks and recreation to utilities, all of these things. And each one of these things, it may be appropriate to have a specified master plan for each of these things. So about a year ago, we just went through the process of, it was approximately a year-long process to do a parks master plan. We had never done one, to figure out what's the appropriate amount of parks, what type of amenities should the town be providing, where they should be located, how they should be integrated into the community, what sort of staffing considerations have to be done for the town. These are all very important questions. And in terms of how do you get public input on that, working with the homeowners associations, which I have scars. They're not the easiest. I'll leave it at that. But I worked with Jay Davis, who is a really phenomenal teacher at Smyrna High School, and I worked with Smyrna Middle School. We actually took, huge boards in with our Planning Commission and Parks and Rec Board, and we had seventh graders, and we had the high school student council. Actually, we had big aerials of each of our parks or proposed parks, and they got to play with puzzle pieces to say, we want this sort of amenity here, we want this sort of amenity here, and then they got to talk about it as a group. So I think that's a way to be able to engage even the people that are potentially going to be living in your community 10 or 20 years down the road, which I think is important.
And kind of while we're on the topic of comprehensive plans and comprehensive rezonings, we've kind of seen in recent times that up in Newcastle County there was kind of a fuss about how they were going about doing it all at once, and eventually there was the decision to split it up into different parcels at a time and to go about that. So how should the public be thinking about that? And how can they be involved early on in the process? We kind of talked about this.
So I just went through the comprehensive rezoning process. Smyrna, it's been in state law for quite a while that if all those little colors on a map are supposed to denote a zoning district or a menu of zoning districts, that you can. So if it's designated for residential, it has to be R1, R2, or 3, or something like that. Smyrna had never done that, okay? We had to go through, I completed it in May, we rezoned 1,001 parcels. About almost 40% of the parcels in the town had to be rezoned, and this was to account for the past 3 comprehensive plans, along with the currently adopted comprehensive plan. And we sent out literature to every individual to be rezoned. We had to do, good heavens, my code enforcement staff spent a lot of days putting signs up. I can't remember if it was about 300 signs we had to put up around town, which is not easy, and take down. We had a series of 2 public meetings, 2 very low at the firehouse, to be able to go through what each of these zoning districts meant, and we had 2 new zoning districts, and we broke it up into 2 sections, 2 sets of zoning districts. But it was an incredibly long and painful process, but I'm glad that it's behind me now.
Yeah, and just to give a little more context to that, Jeremy, and that's a Herculean effort. I too have, when I worked for the city of Dover many, many years ago, we did the same sort of thing and rezoned 300 parcels on one night to get the comprehensive plan and the zoning to match. But to take it back another level, the reason that's in the Delaware Code is, as somebody here mentioned, the comprehensive plans have the force of law, and no development shall occur except as consistent with the comprehensive plan. The comprehensive plan forms the basis for the land use regulations, which often are called zoning. Sometimes they're called Unified Development Code or other things, but they all have the same effect of regulating the land use. So the important part here is that the policy of the local government, through that community outreach effort, coming up with what the future plan will be, is then implemented over time through the zoning regulations. And if the 2 don't match, they need to match. So that comprehensive planning process, my advice to all the local governments, all 60, when they go through this process, is really to be doing it with an eye towards, almost all of them have zoning. Some of them don't, believe it or not. Most of them do. Is to be looking at your zoning map as well as your future land use map, be talking very clearly and transparently about what's going to need to change if we adopt the plan that is being considered by the community. And, the zoning change should not be a huge surprise if, again, with engagement of the community, making sure everybody's on the same page. In fact, when I worked for Dover, those many, many years ago, we actually did it all in the same night, and it really was packaged as a package, if you will. we're going to agree to, because Dover was in the same place Smyrna was back in those days. There had been 3 comprehensive plans, and no one had ever changed the zoning, and it became a really big issue when in a neighborhood that was, the plan said it was going to be a single-family neighborhood, somebody started building apartments because the zoning was in place since 1968 that would allow the apartments to be built, and that state law that I just mentioned wasn't in place then, and the community was like, whoa, hold on, we at least need to know what we're expecting in our community. So again, back then when we did it, it was kind of all in one night. I know in Newcastle County, a little context for those of you who were not up in Newcastle County, it kind of came through, and it was a lot all at once. Newcastle County is, I'm going to give them, first of all, I'll give the county planning staff kudos for doing the work to figure out that I believe there were 87, see, I was close. There was 87 parcels that needed to be changed out of a county with tens of thousands of parcels. That was a pretty detailed effort. And I know what they found out was, that was a lot all at once in a lot of different neighborhoods. They needed to take the time to do that, more deliberately in each community. And I think, not to explain away, but that sort of COVID thing sort of really messed up the whole community outreach and community participation aspect for just about everybody in the world. And Newcastle County was going through their comprehensive plan during the COVID, which, didn't allow them to get into the communities as much. So I'll stop there. I think that's Jamie. No,
I think you've covered it, David.
All right. Well, moving on, I guess, we're here to kind of discuss a lot of the processes, and all of you are very involved in planning in your communities and kind of the county and state in general. But it's important to know, kind of the insiders, where are you seeing the most frustrations, and where are kind of some of the biggest hiccups in your processes, and how could they be improved?
Let me start in seeing 60 comprehensive plans and 60 local government jurisdictions in Delaware. They've all got a different story. They've all got a different plan. They've all got different issues, and I think the answer is going to be different, in each community. I think in terms of just a little, our monthly process of the PLUS process. I think I get a lot of comments about that. And, again, the PLUS process is meant to be an early view into a concept plan a developer wants to do. And the purpose of that is to collect information from all of our state agencies that may have either permitting or regulatory requirements or recommendations, because again, we have agencies that do transportation and historic preservation and fire marshal and environment and those types of things, and not all local governments have the fully paid planning staff or the consultants to have that expertise. So we really try to do a very thorough job with that process every month as developments come through. The feedback I get, and I take this to heart from the development community, is it's first of all, it takes too much time, and it's really about a 2-month start to end, but you have to prepare things, and that's maybe a third month. And what the frustration I'm hearing is that kind of slows them up getting in the process for the local governments, and that's more of an issue for some local governments than others. My counter to that, and I just we've had some recent examples of where, developers and their engineers maybe aren't taking the conceptual part of this to heart, in that they could come through that process as early as they're able to define what it is they want to do on that site. They don't have to have a fully engineered plan ready to submit to the local government. We probably haven't promoted that and sort of shared that enough, but I think that the purpose is get that information early so that as you're developing that engineered plan to comply with Sussex County or Smyrna's regulations, that that information can be built into that process and not have to change anything. So I think we could do, more outreach on, coming through earlier to save that time. And I also hear a lot of frustration, from the development community, particularly in that, the PLUS, the permitting process as you get through towards the end of you go through PLUS, and then you go through a local government land use review process as a developer, But you have to coordinate with, DelDOT is a big one. DelDOT's got the roads and the traffic impact study and all those type of improvements. You have to coordinate with the fire marshal and go through the fire marshal to get their approval. You got to coordinate with the local conservation district to get your stormwater plans approved. And all those things have to come together at the end before you get your approval to move forward and build your development. And, the PLUS process really was not designed to have any role in that later coordination of things. That really depends on the local government and the developer and their engineer. And, I just wanted to mention that's a frustration that we hear and are aware of, and certainly talk to our agencies. And that plus letter, that plus comment, that is something that is referred to by the agency permitting folks as they go through, but it really is not the mechanism to make that a smoother process down the road. And I know Jeremy and Jamie both have at times called and talked to me or one of my planners saying, okay, who do you talk to at this agency? We got this development that's not quite going through the right way. So I just wanted to I'll end with that. But that's
I can 100% echo David's comments. I call this front loading, and applicants generally front load as much information as they possibly can. But on the micro level, so we've talked about the strategic level, on the micro level of our individual application processing, and we process applications from one lot to one accessory dwelling unit all the way up to 2,000 units. And each application is unique. Each application has its own information, and larger applications are typically represented by an attorney and an engineer or a team of engineers, transportation experts, and typically with larger applications, that information is front-loaded. But when you look at the smaller applications, I'm thinking the one-lot subdivisions or the application for an accessory dwelling unit or something small where the applicant may not necessarily have the means to use an attorney and front-load that information. It does generate some inefficiency because part of the process is to try to avoid unexpected surprises. And when I say unexpected surprises, I mean the discovery during a public hearing that there's an easement that was not mentioned at all in the application. And that easement is critical to decision-making as to the acceptability of whether the development should even be allowed in the first place. And that inefficiency, that surprise that's generated in the public hearing, it generates delays in the process that affects the next application and the next application. And so the solution to that is to assist, and this is very much a staff responsibility, is to work with applicants as best as we are able to make sure that they are prepared. But what we can't do is, we're not attorneys, we can't professionally advise applicants. So we can't say, well, we think you need to do X, Y, and Z, and A, B, and C because we think you're going to encounter this problem. But we can say, have you thought about this? Have you thought about this question? Are you prepared for this question? And to a degree with subdivisions, there's a series of criteria in Chapter 99 of the Code of Sussex County that outline criteria to be met for the approval of subdivisions. And you can always use those as a checklist. But it's those unexpected surprises that I think as planners we've all encountered. And it's always the unknown. And this is why applicants often pay engineers and attorneys to prepare this and to front load this and to make sure that when the time comes for the public hearing, that the applicant is ready with an answer to potential questions and can satisfactorily address any potential questions. Otherwise, it just delays the whole process. So I 100% echo your comment about front loading at all stages of the process, including permitting. So.
What I think has worked well, having worked in different jurisdictions, is especially when you're dealing with a larger development, it's very important. I can't stress the importance of pre-application meetings enough. Being able to sit down one-on-one with the developer and their engineer, with or without our own town engineer. I don't want to waste because they cost money, so they're third party. So to have our electrical engineer or our water and sanitary engineer sit down, but pre-application meetings are incredibly important because before it goes to the first public meeting, whether that's the Planning Commission and or the Town Council, I want to have 80% of the issues worked out, all right? What I don't want is I don't like the idea of airing dirty laundry in public, and I don't like being surprised in a public meeting if I can avoid it. I want the developer and I to be on the same page, even if we're not in complete agreement, in terms of this is the intent of this zoning district, these are the standards you have to meet, and I will, for a large subdivision, I will oftentimes sit down with their engineer and we'll go through maybe up to 10 iterations before it even goes to Planning Commission. That's very, very important. I also, I don't require it, I can't require it, but I strongly urge them to do pre-application meetings with the state agencies, whether it's DelDOT, Conservation District. Those are the two. Sometimes a fire marshal, because there's a fire lane question that could, you know, have a significant issue on the design of the subdivision. But having pre-application meetings with each of these agencies, in my view, is incredibly important to be able to, they understand what the state agencies are going to say before it even goes to plus. What are their concerns? These are the things we need to do. Now, in terms of how do you avoid, you know, there's some things that local governments and the state can do. You know, having street files for every single parcel is incredibly important. With every permit that's been issued, correspondence been issued for every single parcel, having that for each parcel is very important in my view, because it gives a history so that you know about that easement. Because technically almost all easements have to be approved by the town anyway. That's very important. Can we get that the slide with the process on there? Zoning ordinances, are not easy for members of the public. Zoning ordinances sometimes always aren't even easy for planners to understand. Our zoning ordinance, and we're just a municipality of less than 14,000, is 300 and some pages. And to be able to understand what's permitted in a particular zoning district, you sometimes have to go back 3 zoning districts previously in the zoning ordinance. So on your right, that's right, yeah, on your right, what you'll have is what's called a bulk use and a use and a bulk standards table. If your zoning ordinance doesn't have it, and Smyrna had a 1964 zoning ordinance, did not have it. It's incredibly difficult for us to understand, for the Planning Commission to understand, for elected officials, and for developers. So this it makes it easier for them to understand whether or not a particular use is permitted and what the standards are for that zoning district. Lot widths, setbacks, maximum lot coverage, all those sort of things. On the left, what you have is having flow charts that, and these are posted online, which dictate, this is the process, and they're for every single different type of application. We have 3 different types of site plans. We have a major and minor subdivision. There are processes and flow charts for each single one. And not only that, I didn't have this on here. Our applications have a checklist there, and it's in the code, in terms of, and for a major subdivision or Category A site plan, which is our most intensive site plan, there might be 50 things that are required on that actual site plan or subdivision. And there's a checklist. Did you include this particular item? Okay, and what's included on there, we do have the ability to waive, but that was done in consultation with our engineers in terms of what should be required. That way we don't have to ask. And the checklist is on the application. And they should be, if they're smart, checking it off before they even submit it. That way they know whether or not they did their job, okay? And that makes it really easy for me to go back and say, did you do this or did you not do this, all right? The plus process has been around for, I guess, over 20 years now. Has it been 20? 20 years. 20 years, right? Under Governor Ruth Ann Minner. There's good things and bad things, I think, from somebody who's used the process. It's nice. It was much better before COVID when everybody was actually in the same room and you can actually get input in person from those agencies. It doesn't seem to have the same effect when you're looking at somebody on a Zoom screen. I think one of the I would say challenges is that you get a set of comments back from an agency. And in many cases, they're boilerplate comments, okay? The person that's reviewing that hasn't visited the site, all right? That makes a huge difference. And for larger agencies like DelDOT, and this is true in every state, these are behemoth of organizations, and you're trying to get comments from each of these different offices within a huge agency, and that's a challenge under the best of circumstances. And some agencies like DelDOT they've had a revolving door of retirements or people leaving, and that's really made it difficult for certain agencies to be able to provide good comments and provide continuity to developer and to local governments, and that's tough, and it's a tough challenge. One of the things that the biggest critiques I would have is that I've sat in meetings with DelDOT, for instance, and I'll go for one we had this past year where we're going to upgrade a road to accommodate 2 sets of developments, and the question is, well, what size roundabouts do we have? All right, DelDOT said in meeting, we're going to have a pretty small roundabout. I can't remember, it was 40 or 50 feet. The developer goes out, they design a road and a road system with turn lanes based upon that size roundabout. They go submit for final, 6 months later. We actually want like a 120-foot roundabout. Well, you just required the developer to redesign a project because you couldn't give them comments. You changed your mind in terms of what you want, and I have a problem with that. The rules are the rules, and the rules are meant to be followed, but you need to be providing what those rules are up front, and you need to be reinforcing that each step of the way, not providing, changing your mind. I mean, I think that's very important. I think we owe that as reviewing officials, we owe that to developers and to the public, that you are being consistent in what we're saying. So I'll leave it with that.
I want to bring it back to something David and Jamie were talking about kind of efficiency and kind of the planning process in Delaware in general. There's been a lot of, developers have often criticized the length of the process and how it can sometimes drag out to more than a year. In your eyes, some people would push for a 6-month process to kind of boost growth across the state. Is that feasible in your eyes? And if not, where can we kind of trim some of the fat to get that time down?
Ready in 6. That's actually an economic development program that came out of a Delaware Business Roundtable study about 7 years ago, and that's something that actually the Carney administration has worked very hard in terms of economic development projects to work towards, permitting in 6 months. The 6-month, time frame. I don't know if that's the exact number, but things that will speed the process along and kind of avoid some of the hurdles that Jeremy talked about. There's something called the Site Readiness Fund that provides funding for developers to make sites shovel-ready and sort of address some of those transportation issues and infrastructure issues ahead of time. There's a similar, DelDOT program called a Site Transportation Infrastructure Investment Fund, TIF, that does something similar and sort of offsets some of those costs of those offsite improvements, again, with the goal of if a business is coming to Delaware that's going to provide jobs, to sort of make their path easier and less time-consuming for that particular business. We've talked about there's a part of the Ready in 6 agenda was also something called House Bill 104, which exempts economic development projects from PLUS if they meet certain criteria and if they're in investment levels 1 or 2, which are our growth areas of our plans. So that is in place, and sort of the caveat to that is PLUS is always optional and available to developers in any case, and some developers of economic development projects have chosen to go through PLUS just to find out some of that information from the state agencies, so they make sure they don't have an unexpected something that comes up later in the process. But I think it has been helpful in some cases where there's a real tight time frame and turnaround. And those are all state government things that can be done. I also just mentioned that my office, myself, I can waive PLUS in instances where it's going to, there's a list of things that can be considered, but economic development, environmental protection, educational things are among them. So oftentimes I get a call from a developer, or a local government, or a mayor, or a governor saying, hey, we need to speed this through the process. Can we waive PLUS? And we work with our agencies directly on those. So there are ways that we can change our state government process to make things a little quicker. I think the concept I talked about earlier regarding master planning is really the sort of secret sauce here, that if we could do that in more places where we're ready for growth and work out those infrastructure and utility and density issues ahead of time, I think, it really shouldn't be a year-long process. It should be, hey, we're doing exactly what we said we were going to do. Let's review it and let's pull some permits and get going. And again, I'm talking only about state government types of things. Each local government has a different process and a different workload and a different time constraint. And my colleague over here, I'll let him talk about that, but I know Sussex has got a pretty long queue of projects. I have colleagues in Kent County, for instance, who don't have the same queue. Matter of fact, we just saw a major subdivision come through Plus for Kent County, and their comment to us is, "Wow, this might be the only one we have this year. This is great." And they have a pretty tight process. As a matter of fact, we have a Plus MOU where we concurrently can go through Plus while the developer submits to the local government in Kent County, and can sort of trim. A lot of time, it doesn't take a year in Kent County to get through the land use process, but again, it will take time to get through the DelDOT and the fire marshal, and all those things must be finished at the end before they start building. But again, every local government is going to be different, and don't get me started about Middletown, because they certainly have a different way of moving things a little faster when they want them. So anyway, I don't know if Jamie or
And sorry, to cut you off. There is a question I want to get to before we open it up to questions, and it is about public involvement in the planning process. When, in your eyes, in all of your eyes, do you think it's the best time for the public to weigh in on a plan and its process, and how should they be commenting? Is showing up on the night of a meeting too late?
you go.
Yeah, sure. I'm happy to take this one. So when it comes to a formal land use application, there is something called the public record. And the public record is those documents, those comments, everything that is before the decision maker in the consideration of that application. And the public record opens day one. So the day the application is formally submitted to your planning and zoning department, that is the day the record opens, and that record is open right up until the record is closed by the decision maker, which is usually following one public hearing, and then you actually have multiple public records. You can have a public record for each decision maker.
And sorry, the day it's submitted, is that when it goes to a planning and zoning board, or is that when their application is actually submitted to the county?
The day one is the day the application is formally submitted to the county. So the day it arrives on that counter.
And how can people see when it's submitted?
So I'm very glad you asked that, because I can help promote the land use docket that we built for Sussex County. So for decades and decades, Sussex County was very much paper-based. If you wanted to know about land use applications that had not yet been noticed, you had to go into the department and ask about applications, or maybe you'd heard about something. Nowadays, it's all put online in a land use docket I'm very, very proud and appreciative of Sussex County Council for their support that they've shown staff in building this interactive land use docket, where you can go on now and interactively on a map see all the applications that are pending. You can search and you can refine. So if you want to see just subdivisions or major subdivisions, you can refine this data. So you can now see what's pending, what's in the queue, what's being decided, and you can click on them and you can see the comments. You can see all of that as if you were perusing the physical case file in front of you. You can do all of that at home online, and I see people in the room who I know are familiar with the land use docket and use it regularly. And it also lets you see all the comments that have been submitted. So if you want to see what the sentiment is for a live application and who's in support and who's in opposition, you can do all of that from the comfort of your cell phone now. And it's very, very popular, and it's actually increased public participation now in the process. But the answer to your question is that public record exists from the moment the application is submitted, not just when the postcard notifications go out and arrive in folks' mailboxes, or when you see that site notice, that you can submit comments at any time and they enter the public record. I think a lot of folks submit comments, they see things go to Plus and the application hasn't yet been submitted. And legally there isn't an application yet at that point. You can, by all means, attend the States Plus process and engage that way, but it's not until the application physically arrives at the local planning department that the public record opens. So.
I'm going to take a slightly different take on that, in the sense that by the time the application is submitted, I want to say that a lot of things are already set, because what I think there's oftentimes the biggest disconnect is that people don't understand what's in their own zoning ordinance in terms of what does it give them, okay? Can you do the slides with the landscape on there? So a zoning ordinance is incredibly complicated, okay? And there's a million different standards in there, everything from lot sizes to setbacks to the amount of parkland that has to be done or open space that has to be done. And the most important thing, in my view, is establishing a good legislative intent in your comprehensive plan in terms of what these land use categories, what are you trying to achieve with these land use categories? Are you trying to retain and complement what is already there, which is in the case of, for instance, our downtown residential? We want new development to look like the development that's already there, all right? For new development along the highway, we did this Route 13 corridor plan. I was looking for the one with the green, stuff with the green. Go back. Oh, shoot. Let's see if I can find it. The one that looks like this. It's incredibly important to figure out, you have a legislative intent, and then the real work, well, keep going back. Good heavens. The real important work is figuring out what are the standards that need to be in that zoning district. So for the corridor plan, for instance, David and his team and DelDOT and McCormick Taylor went through over a year-long process to create a Route 13 master plan. I had to come through in 2013 and actually draft 40 pages worth of standards to actually what kind of development is going to comply with this intent, okay? That's incredibly important. And then you have to, on a yearly basis or every couple of years, you need to evaluate yourself. Is this giving you the development that you want to give, all right? Now, I did this particular instance right here about, good heavens, it's probably about 12, 13 years ago. I actually was working at University of Delaware at the time. In terms of, for a public to understand, what does a zoning ordinance mean, all right? So I created, using, with a program called SketchUp, in terms of like creating a fictional landscape, in terms of like this could be any landscape, anywhere, particularly in a county, and then figuring out, this is what one-to-one zoning would look like with like a 20% open space provision, all right? It's very important for them to understand this is what this is going to give you, all right? This is what 1 to 5 is going to look like. 1 dwelling unit per 5 acres. For an elected official or for a planning commission member, even for staff, it's difficult to visualize what these things sort of mean, all right? This is what a 20-acre large lot zoning would look like, all right? That's what build-out would look like on those particular parcels. And then there's a couple different other options. And that way, it gives the elected officials an opportunity to say, I like this one, or I don't like this, okay? For the corridor plan, when I drafted the design standards, you were able to export buildings directly onto Google Earth, and they could see this is what a 50-foot setback looks like. This is what a 10-foot setback looks like. This is what a 10-foot sidewalk looks like, or would look like. This is what a 5-foot sidewalk looks like. And it gives them the ability to be able, in real time, to be able to say, I like this, I don't like this. That's important because oftentimes when that development application is submitted, if the developer is complying with your code, you legally can't deny the application, and that's incredibly important to understand. And people get upset, like, I don't like this development. Well, it goes back to your zoning ordinance. The development that's occurring is based upon the standards that are in your code, okay? So drafting the right code, in my view, is the most important part.
And let me just chime in here. I think public participation is most important at the comprehensive planning level, as we've said before, but I'll add to that here that comprehensive planning, so our comprehensive plans in Delaware are 10-year documents. They get adopted, they're in place for 5 years, they're reviewed, in 10 years they're updated again. And technically speaking, the public participation process happens once every 10 years. But I will sort of suggest that comprehensive planning should be a continuous process in the communities. And as Jeremy was describing the intricacies of the ordinances and knowing more about that, really, when that plan hits the docket or the desk in the planning office, both Jamie and Jeremy are right. That complies with the comprehensive plan, it complies with the zoning ordinance, and when you're commenting on that plan, you're really commenting on some of the details of maybe how it interfaces with your neighborhood. But the understanding of what can happen in your neighborhood is something that deserves to be talked about and engaged with on a regular, ongoing basis. And often that can happen in terms of every comprehensive plan has got implementation items, master plans, additional studies, additional ordinances that need to be done. And, to the extent that a local government has the resources to do that, those are activities that can be done and should be done and engage the community on an ongoing basis. So everybody's more aware of what is happening in their community with their plan. So I'll stop there.
Well, now we're going to open it up. If anybody has questions, David will be walking around with a microphone. Yeah, David, our David. So, any questions? Here we go.
We almost got away then with no questions. I was like,
Hello, you guys. Thanks for having the panel. I am also with Spotlight Delaware. I'm Nick's colleague. I just wanted to maybe make it crystal clear what you guys were saying, or you can tell me if my understanding is incorrect. But if, over the last couple of years, we've heard, as reporters, we've heard a lot of outcry about warehouses going up in developments on formerly farmland. And a lot of the planners are saying, well, and elected officials are saying we can't deny those permits because they are zoned for that if they're zoned for business park or something else. But for a community that looks at the farm next to them and says, I don't ever want that to be industrial or something like that, the only way that they can get together to block a theoretical development in the future is to participate in the comprehensive plan that happens every 10 years. Is that right? There's no other way?
Yeah, I would say that's the best way to work as a community to define the land use for that future parcel. And I mentioned the 10-year clock, if you will. Comprehensive plans can be amended and updated at any time, so it doesn't have to be just on that 10-year cycle. So if at year 3 or 4, the community decides that we want to work on a land use for that farm that's planned for industrial, and we don't want that anymore, we want to do another community effort and amend our plan or completely update our plan, that happens actually more than you think. So that would be the way to do it.
How would they do that? How would they go about that?
The local government council and planning commission would sort of engage in another planning effort and maybe hire a consultant, maybe do it with staff that they have and start holding public meetings. And certainly it would be pretty wise to reach out to the property owner of that parcel and any development interests and also community groups and other associations, and just kind of have that community conversation around what are the and maybe run some exercises. What are the potential future uses of that parcel that might be more compatible with what our vision for our community is. And maybe our vision for our community has changed since our plan was adopted 2 years, 3 years, 4 years ago. Frankly, it often happens after elections. You get a new council in place or a new mayor or somebody, and boy, we don't like the plan that group did. Well, we're going to throw it away and do another plan. And my planners sitting in the back of the room, Josh and Dorothy, they love when that happens. They get to work with them all over again, and it's a whole nother process. So,
but they couldn't do that with. This is for a theoretical development. This is not for any existing plans. If a developer had bought a piece of property, has plans for it, I mean, it would be inviting litigation if they tried to change the comp plan.
So the planning happens proactively ahead of time.
Right.
After a developer has bought it and submitted the application and it's hit Jamie's desk or Jeremy's desk, that's not the time to be talking about changing what that developer bought that plan for and the plan and the regulations that they're going to adhere to, because they have there's a legal term I can't remember right now, but they do have rights at that point to proceed under the regulations that are in place when they submitted their application.
Yeah, that's I mean, I think just to beat a dead horse here, it's so many people will call us as reporters or go to public meetings and think, okay, I see this plan, it's going next door to me, I want to do what I can do to block it, and effectively their options are they don't have any. They're once something is planned and it is within the zoning, you as a community you can't block, you can't deny it.
I'm happy to take that. Quite the opposite, actually. So,
Okay.
so it depends ultimately. The level of engagement depends on what type of application it is. We're talking about a subdivision. If I use your industrial example,
Sure.
Say it's an agricultural residential zoning district, and say someone is applying for a warehouse that isn't zoned and is going through a conditional use process. That process is entirely discretionary to the decision maker, i.e. county council make the decision on whether to grant the conditional use. And there is no it's not a by right development. You hear the term by right when it comes to residential development in residential districts. But in the example you gave, it was a discretionary development, and very much the decision makers are very much alive and receptive to what they're hearing in terms of opposition during the public hearing. In fact, the public record that I talked about earlier, that every comment that is received, whether made verbally or whether made in writing, those comments become part of the public record that the decision maker is required to consider. Now, and ultimately the decision is made, and you have to identify what the public interest is. But if, for example, the concerns were that hypothetical industrial development were entirely incompatible with its residential surroundings, then absolutely that application can be denied. Now, I'm not speaking about any particular live application. This is a theoretical example that we're using, but the compatibility of a proposed use of land to its existing uses and neighbours, and proximity and design and mitigation are absolutely matters that can be considered. And applications have been denied for those reasons.
And are those conditional use permits, are those typical, are those the norm, are those not the norm?
I would
in
say
Sussex?
statistically in Sussex County, I can't speak for all of Delaware, but statistically in Sussex County, conditional use applications are more numerous than change of zone applications, if that answers your question. So,
Okay, and I'm thinking mostly Newcastle County because that's where
I
I've
could
done
not
most of
speak
my
to another
reporting. But
jurisdiction.
yeah, no, okay, so many of the larger developments, non-residential developments, are not going on land that the pre-existing zoning would accommodate that land. Is that?
I could only answer your hypothetical
Sure,
question
sure.
based on the rules in
Yeah.
Sussex. It sounds like you have a very particular type of application in mind in Newcastle.
I don't actually. No, I just
I
I'm
would
thinking
comment that
theoretically.
if the local government, in my view, is doing their job, you should be providing transparency to the public and the elected officials and the development community that this is the type of development that is going to occur. So allowing a conditional use, if something's zoned for agriculture and you allow a conditional use to an industrial sort of development, in my view, that's that you're asking for litigation. And I don't think that's the most proactive thing that you should be doing as a local government. You have an obligation, whether it's for development or development is not appropriate in this area, to put those guardrails up and that they are known in terms of. Now, there are instances, for instance, we have 600 acres in the town of Smyrna that were annexed back in the early 2000s, 3 governors ago, and we were actually taken to court over Newcastle County over annexing said parcels. But those parcels were annexed and identified for development over 20 years ago. They're just now making their way through the development process. And obviously there's a lot of hard feelings in terms of neighbors that didn't know that that was going to be there. In that particular instance, that's a legislative decision that the town council made that was agreed to and signed into a memorandum of understanding with the state Office of Planning Coordination and Newcastle County, stating that these parcels are going to be annexed and they're going to be developed. In that instance, there's nothing the public can do in the sense they have the ability to comment in terms of the type of, there are window dressing things that can occur at the Planning Commission and Town Council, but those parcels are going to be developed, and that's really important. Now, having worked on both sides of the state line, I think one thing that Delaware doesn't do as good of a job as Maryland does. The rural counties on the eastern shore of Maryland realized, from a structural standpoint, they have to pay. The counties in Maryland have to pay for everything. They fund the school system. They have county roads. They have every county has a sheriff's department or police department. So if they allow a development to go, if they allow 500 housing units out in the middle of nowhere, they're the one that has to pay for it. All right. In the state of Delaware, there's a disconnect because the people that are approving the development are not the ones necessarily funding, the development cost. Okay. They're not the ones funding the schools. They're not the ones funding, in many cases, the police department. They're not the ones funding the roads. Okay. So there's a disconnect in Delaware in terms of, they don't have, local government authorities don't have to pay for their bad decisions in certain instances. Which and I would say, having worked both sides of the state line, the rural counties in Maryland on the other side of that arbitrary state line have done a better job in terms of putting guardrails in terms of where growth is located. Okay.
We're going to take one more question, and then
Good morning, and thank you for your time this morning. When we talk about master planning in this context, I'm understanding it to mean a broad swath of parcels, not just an individual project or development. And so the question, it's actually a twofold question. A comprehensive plan is required. The future land use map is required and has the force of law. But if I understand correctly, whether a jurisdiction gets into master planning the way we're talking about it this morning, that's more a discretionary act. I'm not going to put David on the spot, but I'm going to ask you, are there any examples of master planning done in Kent or Sussex? And you can exclude Smyrna so that I don't put you on the spot, that we can look to.
Yes. Smyrna, we're 13-quarter plan, great plan in Kent. Southeast neighborhood of Milford, where the Bay Health Hospital is. I worked with the city of Milford for 3 years on that area, and the story behind that one, real briefly, is developers wanted to annex all that area, and DelDOT at the same time was building that grade separated intersection, and there was a lot of angst about what type of development would occur. The state, its agencies, the city of Milford, and the developers all worked together on the future of that area, and that hospital went there because it was ready to accommodate that kind of growth and that kind of traffic, and it had the utilities, it had the infrastructure there. We also worked with Kent County in their last comprehensive plan in 2018. They identified several areas, but two of the areas, Little Heaven and South Frederica, were identified by the county as economic development zones. And when we reviewed the plan through PLUS and through our agencies, there was a lot of questions about what that meant, and frankly, the county didn't really know either. So we worked for over a year with Kent County, with all our state agencies, with DelDOT taking a lead, working on what types of uses, what types of traffic, what types of utilities could happen in the South Frederica areas where the Turf Sports Complex is, if you're familiar with that driving north, and Little Heaven is just north of that. Little Heaven, it will be a corporate center type of an office thing according to their master plan, and the South Frederica area is slated for residential, commercial, restaurants, hotels. Some of that has been built now. So those are, Kent County examples. I am drawing a blank on whether we've, do we have one in, we don't have really quite like that in Sussex, other than, let me end with this. There's not master plans, but, DelDOT is doing this, Transportation Improvement District program for transportation. And it's not a master plan because really it looks at the base zoning and the transportation and creates that road network. But I think those are areas that are ideal to become master plan areas, and that's something we've talked a lot with DelDOT about. And again, they're sort of 8 or 10 years into that program. They've got, I think, 12 or 16 of them ongoing in the state, and Sussex has one right now, Henlopen, and there's another one in the Roxana area that's being developed. But those are some examples, and happy to connect you with that materials.
all right.
The other one that came to mind was Eden Hill, west of Dover. That's a master plan development with a large medical infrastructure building and residential around it. So that's a great example of mixed-use development being master planned. The county actually looked at Eden Hill and the process that was followed by the city of Dover when it came to development of the county's master plan zoning district ordinance, which has been subject to public hearings but has not progressed too much further than the public hearing stage. But in Sussex County, we are working on a new ordinance. It's been discussed, and it's in the comprehensive plan. It's one of the objectives that staff have been exploring, and that is a new ordinance specifically targeting and focusing on large-scale, multi-track development. We're talking more than 100 units or 200 units or more than 100 acres, and that has been through PLUS and has been subject to public hearings. It's very much a work in progress is the answer, but the county is thinking about master planning at that scale, because really when you plan at scale, that's when you start to get strategic benefits. So if you have 5 unrelated developments and the 5 unrelated decisions, and I can think of many developments not far out of Lewis where those developments and subdivisions all came through individually, and you lose when you plan on that micro scale, you lose that interconnectivity and that overarching thinking that you would get with master planning. So with master planning, you get that interconnection, for example. Interconnection comes when you start thinking at scale. So.
Awesome. All right. Well, that's our time for this panel. I would like to thank our panelists for their time and their insight this morning. Yep.
Thank you.
We're going to take a brief recess here. We'll be back in 10, 15?
2 or 3.
2 or 3 minutes. Okay. Sorry.
Okay. Thank you so much, everybody, for coming out this first Monday right after the Thanksgiving break. And thanks for you that maybe had to travel early this morning to get here. Kind of piggybacking off my colleague Nick, unlike Nick, I'm pretty much a lifelong Delawarean. Grew up in Brandywine 100, lived in Newark. Now I live in Bryan's neck of the woods in the Middletown, Odessa, Townsend corridor. And so even though I don't live down here amongst many of you in Sussex, I too see the ever-changing landscape in Delaware, and that is what makes us one of the fastest growing states in the country right now and the fastest growing in the Mid-Atlantic. So we've got a great panel set up. I'm very excited and thankful that both developers and advocates kind of are willing to come out and have a conversation today. And one of the things I was struck by when I talked to everybody on this panel was each of them really said to me, I think you'll be surprised how much we have in common. And I just think that that's a great way to kind of start a panel that we're all Delawareans, all kind of concerned about the future of our state. But just to introduce each of our panelists, and then I'll give them a couple minutes to talk a little bit about their organizations. Preston Schell is right here next to me. He's a co-founder of Schell Brothers. I'm sure you're all very familiar with Schell Brothers in these parts. Founded it with his brother Chris. He's also a co-founder of Ocean Atlantic Companies. This is a mixed-use developer, and most recently he's been starting to get into some affordable housing projects as well. You want to tell us a little bit about yourself and kind of your organization?
Sure. Thanks for the intro. So those of us that are familiar with our organizations know that Chris runs Schell Brothers and I run Ocean Atlantic. I often find out about Schell Brother specific projects in the Cape Gazette, like most of you do. And because Chris and I sometimes compete against each other, which I know is very awkward. But Ocean Atlantic is a developer that's been around since 1997. We initially did condos, for sale condos up and down Route 1. Then we got it kind of in the mid, like 2003 to 2004, got more involved in master plan communities with Painter's Mill. We were involved in Villages of 5 Points. More recently, a project called Coastal Club. And then lately, we've been doing a lot of apartments, senior living, and then we've done 3, I wouldn't call them necessarily affordable housing projects, I'd call them inclusionary workforce housing projects, where we've been working with the Delaware State Housing Authority and incorporating their mixed income market fund program to provide select units affordable to households making 65% of area median income or less. And that's kind of the most exciting thing that we're working on right now.
One of the other things that excites me about Preston as well is that he's been a leader in the Sussex Land Trust as well. So working on also the preservation side, he's both developing and preserving the county.
People think that's they don't understand how those two things can work together. But in my opinion, some property is appropriate for development and other property is appropriate for preservation. And those that are doing the developing should be playing a role in the preservation of certain properties.
Right. Next to Preston, we've got Brian DeSabatino. He's president and CEO of EDIS Company. It's a Wilmington-based development company. He's also the co-founder of a development known as the Town of Whitehall, which is up in my neck of the woods in Middletown. That's a really forward-looking village setting, mixed modal, mixed-use type development.
Great. It's a real honor to be here today. It's real interesting. Preston is an incredibly accomplished developer, and here I sit as a sort of a one-trick pony, but I'm going to tell you a little bit about the town of Whitehall. But I love how our guests up here are called advocates. So when we're sitting across the table from each other, I want to make sure I'm able to use that, you're advocates. Okay, good. I want to make sure that we're on the same side of the table. Our firm is EDIS, and I appreciate the invitation or the introduction as developer, but I'd really characterize us as builder. We're a commercial builder, have been for about 115 years here in Delaware. And about 25 years ago, a gentleman in our office by the name of Tom Payne encouraged us to have a discussion because maybe we were advocates then as well. We saw some things going sideways in our community. We really didn't like the way community looked. And we began to do a lot of research, and we held town halls, and we called the series of town halls called the Our Town series, and we brought speakers in from around the country to talk about alternative ways to approach philosophically development. So on the heels of that, we were engaged with a project that actually never got built. It was a multimodal project right across from the Christiana Hospital, where the current train station is. There were supposed to be apartments and shops and houses, trains and buses in close proximity to the hospital, but the casinos were able to put a lot more money on the table than we were, and just as soon as we were in, we were out. But on the heels of that, we were approached by a philanthropy by the name of the Welfare Foundation, and they had, ironically, sold a bunch of property in that Christiana 100 area to the hospital and to the university and into a group of other landowners, and took those proceeds south of the canal and created this property, this 2,000-acre property called Whitehall. Evidently, when they bought it, Delmarva Power and Light was the previous owner. It was going to be a nuclear power plant. Little trivia for the day. And so instead of going over the canal and looking at houses and farmland, we could be looking at blinking lights like Salem. But 3 Mile Island happened, and Delmarva decided to do something different. And so they came to us and said, you know, we would like to create a legacy project. And we ran around the country and around the world to try to respond to the philanthropy's request to how do we do something different? How do we not leave tract housing and strip shopping centers in our way? Because 2,000 acres is a really big deal. And so we began to model ideas from around the country and around Delaware and around the world. And our very first foray into it was actually several forays into it were rejected because the philanthropy didn't like the idea of density. And then we flipped density on its head, and we showed them what it could look like from the street level, and we showed them that some of the most beloved places in the world had density and responded to public need quite well. And so from those conversations, we began planning what then became the 2,000-acre journey for us that we affectionately call Whitehall. Oh, you've got one.
Just and to tag on to Brian as well, he's currently president of the Delaware Business Roundtable. Yeah, former president,
chairman of the Delaware Business Roundtable.
Chairman of the Delaware Business Roundtable.
Thank you for David Edgell, if you're still here for us. You get a big shout out. You get a hat and a T-shirt for mentioning the Delaware Business Roundtable.
That's right. The Roundtable is our organization of the leading CEOs in the state, and they were responsible for the Ready in 6 plan that they continue to push the state on. And if you don't follow Brian on social media, I encourage you to. He's one of the few executives out there willing to spar with people and have honest debate over kind of the future of our state. So,
but be nice. please be nice.
Next, we have Jill Hicks, a co-founder of the Sussex Preservation Coalition and current president, I believe, of the organization. They've really kind of given a voice to some of the concerns in our southernmost county down here. Tell us a little bit about your background.
So first of all, I want to thank Spotlight Delaware, Jake and Allison, for putting this together. This is a great forum for us to get together and discuss, and also have an audience that's interested. And so thank you for doing this. So Sussex Preservation Coalition came about only maybe 3 years ago. And what happened was my husband and I were part owners of a beach house in Lewis since 1963. It was in his family. And in 2015, we moved here permanently. Beautiful location. We're surrounded by woods. And I guess around 2019, 2020, somewhere in there, the woods were purchased and the developer was going to clear cut the woods. Now, there were other plans before that we had seen that were not concerning because they were leaving a lot of the woods and the wetlands in place. So we got neighbors together and we studied up on the codes and realized that the codes were not adequate, but we were going to challenge this anyway. And we got a lot of public participation. We held a rally. It was initially denied, and then we lost in subsequent appeal. Now, during one of those rallies, I met Jane Grudenbaum, and she and I got to talking about this whole issue, realizing that what was happening in Sussex County is that people were fighting these little skirmishes here and there, not realizing that the real problem was in the code and ordinances and the lack thereof. And so Jane and I talked and decided that we needed to get together and form this coalition that would bring people and organizations together to work on those codes and ordinances and make changes that are needed to preserve our woods, our forests, our wetlands, and make livable communities, healthy, sustainable environment for everyone and every living creature. And that's what we've been doing for the last 3 years.
That's great. And piggybacking on that as well, Jane Grudenbaum's here with us. And of course, she was recently elected one of your 5 county council members down here in Sussex County. So taking kind of that advocacy work right to the heart of government. So last on our panel, but definitely not least, is Dale Swain. He's a retired project manager for the Delaware City Refinery, but has kind of found a new passion in life in advocacy, and most recently has been working both with state employee retirees in kind of the debate and fight over Medicare Advantage for state employees, and then most recently a co-founder of Residents Against Delaware's Arbitrary Rezoning, or RADAR. That's been a group that's really organized some citizen concerns, particularly around Newcastle County's comprehensive plan process. You want to tell us a little bit about yourself and RADAR?
Okay, well, thank you very much. I also want to reiterate thanking Spotlight Delaware for having this forum. It is a wonderful forum to get people more involved and understanding. I will also mention with Brian, he referred to us as advocates. With some of the local officials, some of the developers, I have heard a lot of other names, and they weren't advocate. The public can be the thorn in the side, unfortunately, but the public does have a right and a voice to speak up. It is a very involved process to understand the land use. I have learned an immense amount. I was involved with land use back in the late 90s and early 2000s with a group called Southern Newcastle County Alliance that did a lot of good work, but then they faded away like a lot of citizens groups do. I appreciate that Jill has been able to have hers going for 3 years and that they are expanding to deal with the issues. For RADAR, we were created around one very big issue that Mr. Edgell had mentioned earlier, the mass rezoning ordinance in Newcastle County that was 87 properties. Some of them were upzoning, changing from suburban to like warehouses. Some of them were downzoning. But there was very, very little detail other than a map that didn't tell you much of anything of what these 87 properties were. We gathered together hundreds of people. We had 2 fire hall meetings with about 300 to 400 people at each of them. Thanks to Spotlight Delaware and most of the other Delaware media, we were able to get the word out very effectively. Within 3 months of us getting involved, the county executive requested that this ordinance be pulled. And then finally in February, the county council did pull it, and shut it down. They went to a new process that the land use department decided to call Take Two, where they broke this up into smaller areas by council district and had individual meetings with maps, people there that knew exactly what was the intent of the property and the zoning change. And it was a very, very informative sessions. The first mass rezoning was not the way to go. The Take Two was a huge improvement and allowed the public to better understand. The hard part with public participation is people have their own lives that they live, and they kind of think, well, I elect the officials, it's their job to take care of all this. But then on the other hand, a large part of the public doesn't even trust the public officials, period. So the citizens have to be involved. The developers are very motivated to get what it is that they want to be built, and obviously that's their right, and they should be able to do that. The citizens need to have a voice, and unfortunately, even though the county councils and the land use departments and planning have a lot of communication tools, it's a very, very involved process, the land use. It can take months or years to even understand. So for the average person, they don't get what's even there. The comprehensive plan for Newcastle County is 580 pages, I think. So it's very involved. The biggest notice is sending out a notice to the residents, but in Newcastle County, it's a 300-foot from whatever they're going to rezone that you get notice. And unfortunately, a lot of those don't even get sent out because they don't have the correct information. So the public needs to be involved, but we do need to find better ways to communicate with the public so that you don't have another thing like what we had.
Awesome. And I'm a member of Radar, just to kind of keep touch of what the advocates are concerned about. I got to tell you, it's a very lively Facebook group, really citizen advocates kind of staying on top of these many different boards and committees and processes, and it's complicated even for somebody that follows it for a living like I do. So just wanted to start, we're going to start with like one or two questions for our developers, one or two questions for our advocates, and we'll really get into a conversation together. But curious for Brian and Preston, when you guys are thinking about building a new community, what goes into deciding the strategy that you take other than maybe just density? What do you think about when you're thinking about types of housing, number of houses, what amenities you might offer in a community? How do you kind of take a holistic approach to a community?
So the first base thing that we always ask is, would I live there? And if the answer is no, generally Ocean Atlantic's not that interested in doing it. So we look at the market, what's going on in the market, what's selling for what price, or what's leasing for what price, what's missing. That the biggest opportunities that we've ever done at Ocean Atlantic is when we determine what's missing and then jump on that and pursue that. For example, this is going way back, but when we first started, people were looking at C1 zoned land, which is the only land in the county, other than HR and HR, but there's no HR left, and there really hasn't been HR for the last 30 years, that allows for 12 units per acre by right. So people would drive up and down Route 1, and there's certain properties on Route 1 that were kind of awkward. They were deep, they didn't have a lot of frontage, there was wetlands on this side and woods on that side, and they didn't lend themselves to being developed as a commercial shopping center. But everybody's knee-jerk reaction was, well, it's C1. It's commercial, obviously, like that's the highest and best use. Well, we ran the numbers on a property. I think the initial property we did it on was Creekwood. And we said, hold on a sec. This land's actually worth $600,000 an acre being developed into condos. We could pay $50,000 a unit, 12 units per acre. And when we backed into the numbers on what it was worth as a commercial shopping center using the rent per square foot, the construction costs, the density you could get, the leasable square feet, it was worth about $200,000 an acre. So we ran up and down Route 1, typically not going for properties that were at an intersection and screamed for commercial. We went for the awkward properties and did 4 or 5 projects that were for sale condo projects. And then a lot of other people followed suit. We were one of the first groups to do apartments. So rental apartments you could never do in Sussex County prior to the real estate crash. And let me tell you why. When you backed into the land value, if you had, let's just assume you had land zoned for multifamily. This is a huge assumption. Let's just make that assumption. If you backed into the land value, there's no such thing as multifamily for rent or multifamily for sale. It's the same zoning. If you backed into the value of what the land was worth for apartments, say in 2005, you would get an evaluation of about $8,000 a unit. If you backed into because the rental rate was about 90 cents to $1 a square foot, but the for sale rate for sale condos was $200 a square foot. If I had like a spreadsheet, I could show you why that is important. But so when you backed into the value for like Villages of 5 Points, great example. Town Center East was originally, for those of you that live down there and are familiar with that project, was originally supposed to be rental apartments. But we went to Craig Hudson, who was the owner, and we said, hey, Craig, that land's worth $8,000 a unit as rentals apartments. We could pay you $50,000 a unit right now to do for sale condos and make you a 50% partner. You can put the money you make in that in government bonds and make a higher annual return than you could doing for rent apartments on that property. That all turned, when condo became a 4-letter word in like 2008 to 2012, the opportunity to do for rent apartments and provide a lot of the housing. The best workforce housing that's out there right now is market rate apartments. The market rate for rental apartments in Sussex County has prices that are affordable depending upon how far west you are and how close to the beach, for any households making between 75 and maybe 98% of area median income. So it's the best way to do workforce housing at scale. But that opportunity only presented itself when no one was buying condos. So I'm not sure if I'm entirely answering your question, but.
Yeah, so what I'm hearing is, there is both a profit and value motive, because obviously you guys aren't charities. Like you have to, the project has to make sense, has to make financial sense, but then you're also trying to fit as much, suffice to say, as much housing onto some of these awkward lots that maybe weren't as desirable by other developers.
Yeah, I mean, so I just remember what your original question was, like, what do you look for? Generally, we look for what the market wants. And unfortunately, and I think for a lot of people in this room would agree, what the market wants an endless supply of right now are for sale single-family homes to the retirees moving to Southern Delaware.
Right.
And if you just want to kind of do the easy development down in Sussex County right now, and you don't want to put a lot of brain power in it, you don't want to go to a public hearing and get told how horrible of a person you are and blah, 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 you just do regular cluster subdivisions. Because in theory, they're by right. They might not be by right for long, but, and in theory, in practice, you don't go to county council, you only go to the commission. But unfortunately, as the permitting arena gets more and more difficult in Sussex County, you're going to see less and less creativity, unless the creativity is built into the code, which people in this room should try to do if that's, like they were talking about in the earlier panel. And you're going to see more and more just basic cookie cutter subdivisions with a pool and with a clubhouse, but because that market appears to be endless.
And that's a perfect segue to kind of maybe Brian's development, because it's far from cookie cutter. And you're familiar because OA sold some of the land to I believe to Brian in the group up there in Whitehall. And when you look at Whitehall, it's really a master plan community, and neighboring communities like Bayberry and others are also master plan, have differing types of housing. How did you come to that strategy?
Before I get to that, I want to sort of double down and just reinforce some things that Preston said. I think it's really important for folks to understand that the folks that are out doing real estate development, that's our bread and butter. That we do that for a living. We either do it for ourselves or for other people that partner with us and landowners. So we see real estate as an investment, just like a stockbroker would see stocks or mutual funds or commodities. Real estate is an important investment, and that's how we feed our families, that's how we feed our organizations. And so as we're looking at those investments, the highest and best use is what the market tells you it is. And so, you know, for instance, in our you know, we have land in the urban context. You know, we either develop because the market has told us that an office building is dying to be here, an institution is dying to be here, housing is dying to be here, or parking is dying. The market will speak to us, or we'll do nothing. But then when the decision is made that the marketplace needs something, then, you know, again, I'm going to reinforce something Preston said. We would love to be as creative as possible, but the best we can do is to respond to the codes in place. Unless we're so passionate about our creativity, we're willing to risk our livelihoods and our reputations and our fortunes to try to convince the bureaucracies, the regulators, and the general public that we have a better idea than the code says should be had. And I think it's important to recognize that after time, that's exhausting. And sometimes we can only be, and again, to use your expression, we can only be as creative as the code will allow us to be, because at some point we have to move on to the next project. So I think, you know, to answer your original question, you know, how do we go about deciding what we want to do with the property? I think the marketplace tells us what the highest and best use wants to be. And we've all made the mistake of pretending that we know better than the marketplace, and we all make those mistakes. And then the creativity that we apply to it really is dependent upon the code. And I'll, again, not to reuse the expression, I'll reinforce what Preston said. I would highly encourage the advocates and the regulators to allow as much creativity as possible, because at the time when the market wants something is not the time to get creative, because there usually isn't enough time. When an employer comes to town, they want to come to town on a specific date. When people want to move, you know, when they want housing in a market, they want to move at a specific date, and you don't always have the luxury of creativity at the moment of transaction. Would you ask me about Whitehall?
How you came up with your type of housing, and that's one of the things that's interesting to me is, you know, when you go to Whitehall, it has a very, trying to think of the right word for it, but it has rear parking in some sections. It has, you know, kind of flat front, you know, sidewalks, approachable fronts. In my mind, that's maybe not the type of housing that the market was telling you at that time that people desperately wanted, because when I drive around Middletown, I see nothing but single-family houses, you know, of a certain type. So did the market tell you that, or was it that you thought there would be a market for a housing of this type?
Yeah, I think, you know, I think if you would ask the Brian of 25 years ago, would I do it again? You know, it's a really hard answer to come to, because it's been hard. It's been really hard. Whitehall is expensive to build. It's illogical. There's a lot of things that are absolutely nutty about it. And will we do it again? Yeah, in a heartbeat. But you have to understand, our motivation was a little bit different. We were working with a philanthropy that wanted a legacy project. And in order to get a legacy project, we didn't invent Whitehall. The concepts that you see at Whitehall aren't novel. We went and we ripped them off from all of the great places all over Delaware, all over the country, and all over the world. The idea of a development having a philosophy that is dedicated to the human, and I'm not suggesting other developments don't have the human in mind, but to make the vehicle sit in a philosophical second position to the person is how we worked backwards. So I'm going to get to your how do we do the housing, all that, because I think it follows this flow. We went to great places through history, whether the great places were Old Newcastle that didn't have cars, Rehoboth Beach, you know, which in the 1870s and early 1900s didn't have cars. We went to great places like Wawasset Park and Rockford Park that were very sort of utopian in character. We traveled to Charleston and literally measured streets and sidewalks and porches and roofs. And we began to collect that data, and you know, who in the room has ever gone on a vacation and you come back and you go, oh man, I'd love to live there because I never had to get in my car. I mean, right? Like everybody goes through that experience. So we responded to that emotional call that, yeah, you know, I love walking the streets of Lewis. I love walking the streets of Rehoboth. So what is it about that? It isn't because, you know, we could fit 7 fire trucks in front of every house, right? Right? It's because I can meet my neighbor at the human scale. I can go and look, I'm not a heavy drinker, but I'm not a teetotaler either. I kind of like to go to walk to dinner and know I can walk home, sort of. So the ability to transact business by foot, right? The ability to get, you know, I really tip my hat to the Appoquinimink School District. They are one of the only bureaucracies that we were able to get in a bus and drive to a walkable community that we wanted to emulate so that they could wrap their head around how would education work in a school. And we could point to Middletown, the old Middletown High School that already sat in the middle of a town. Or, you know, so many other great municipalities that had education in the middle of towns. They had to go see it happening in suburbia. And so when we work backwards from the human experience, what both the code, by the way, Newcastle County was very enlightened at the time. They wrote a code that required us to put a certain percentage of townhomes and cottages and estate homes all within a 5-minute walk of each other. Like we couldn't have the townhome section, and we were responding creatively to the code. And so the selection of housing for us was in response to code.
Awesome. Talking to our advocates at the end here, I'm curious, you know, when you guys talk to your members, and you've got thousands of members really from all over the state, how do you really try to drill down at what are the real concerns? Is it transportation or open space or preservation or density? And how do you kind of extrapolate what are the actual concerns, the things that maybe are manageable or solvable versus maybe just that overall NIMBY feeling? Like, and I experienced it too. I moved into a newer home, and the farm field next to me was like, oh, it's great. It's always going to be a farm field. No, it'll be housing at some point.
If I could I just go
Absolutely.
back a little bit and I would like to address the creativity of the builder.
Absolutely.
We as advocates and as the coalition, we are not trying to stymie anyone's creativity. In fact, we really need their creativity. What we want to do is make sure that the palette they're working with takes care of protecting our forest and our wetlands and our natural habitats. And once we can get those codes and ordinances in place, Sussex County has nothing to protect its forest right now. And we all know that federal regulations have dropped as far as protecting our wetlands. So as a state, we need to protect our wetlands. As a county, we need to protect our forest. And once we get those ordinances in place, then it would be great to have the builders use their creativity to build what we call livable communities. And as far as walking, I agree. I love downtown Lewis. I love walking to the shops. I love going to, especially when I was younger, I loved going to Key West because I would park and then walk the rest of the week to places you talked about. But also, the thing that's missing in Sussex County right now and is getting more and more concerning is that children don't have a place to play in the woods. We all grew up playing in the woods, and that's where creativity really takes hold. You're not playing a structured playground or you're not playing a structured game. In the woods is where you build forts and you have whatever games it is you want to play. You create stories. Right now, we're losing our woods at an alarming rate of about 1,000 acres a year. And the woods are very therapeutic for children and for adults. And so we need those forest lands protected so that people have trails. When you're stressed out, There's nothing better than a walk in the woods. I used to love going to the beach to hear the ocean just slow everything down. A walk in the woods will do the same thing. And so if we can get the codes and ordinances in place to protect these natural resources that we need for reasons of biodiversity and protecting ecosystems, but also for our own lives, then we give the building community a palette to work with and let the creativity go. Because the things that you're doing, we agree with. We're not trying to stop that kind of growth. We just need to get the palette right. So how do we hear from our constituents? Fortunately for Sussex Preservation Coalition, we have over 4,000 individual members and 30 allies that are working with us. And so when something comes up and a question comes up, they contact us. So we get to hear from the public a lot. A lot of us follow social media. There's a lot of screaming going on in social media. It's not really the place to get things done, but you can certainly take the temperature there. And we have monthly meetings where we invite people to come. Right now, we're meeting at the Lewis Library. We get between 50 and 80 people there and 50 and 80 people online. And so we get a chance to hear from actually the voters in Sussex County. So we have a lot of dialogue going back and forth. And I think that's the real key is our 3 words are educate, advocate, and impact. And so it's really important, as was said earlier, that we educate the public so that they know where to go for help, they know how to look up the information, they know to call planning and zoning because the staff at planning and zoning is very helpful. So we have a two-way dialogue going.
Awesome. And Dale?
I'm going to take the same approach that Jill did. I'm going to back up just for a second.
Sure.
I was involved many, many, many years ago, about 25 years ago, when they were first starting the proposal for Whitehall, and they had their concepts. I grew up in Georgetown and wrestled for Sussex Central back with Coach Bastinelli many, many years ago. We had our 50th high school reunion just last fall. Yes, I feel old, but that type of community where you can walk to things, you don't have to drive everywhere. Sussex County has that with Lewis, Seaford, Laurel, all the small towns. In Newcastle County, you really don't have that concept. And the cookie cutter communities that are gobbling up all of the farmland is what you see almost everywhere. The villages and hamlet approach that Brian used for Whitehall, there's only 2 developers that have taken that route because it is easier to just do the cookie cutters. We need a lot more of that approach of the Whitehall and Bayberry. Bayberry is a huge community of about 3,000 homes, but they're spread out in sections that are the different types of housing. And it is walkable. They're building a huge shopping center there now that'll have a grocery store. So people will be able to walk over to their grocery store, come back. They're going to have banks. They're going to have a variety of different stuff there, all within walking distance. We can't keep gobbling up all of the acres in Delaware because you build the homes, you build the businesses, now you need more roads and infrastructure and more police and fire services. So then you build the extra lanes on the road, then there's more development comes in, and then you're building more roads. You need to be able to not keep adding roads and make it more walkable communities. I think from the public perspective, we're not, as Jill said, we're not against housing, we're not against development, but let's make it smarter development and make things, try to emulate the small town approach, the Whitehall approach, so that you can have communities, because all people need homes. Whether it's a rental unit, whether it's a small home, a large home, townhouses, people need homes and places to live. So we need to focus and change the codes in all of the counties so that it can be a truly livable Delaware.
Absolutely. And kind of, maybe I'll start with you on a question, Dale, as we come back down the panel. But I'd like each of you to really assess the current land use processes in the state. Do you feel they're too lenient, too restrictive, just about right? Or, and if they're not what you want them to be, how might you change them?
Well, that's a very interesting
Small question.
I think from a lot of the public's perspective, they would be happy to never see another development ever built and have just their farmland and open space and no more new houses and keep all those people from crowding my area. But there's also a lot of people that want to see development, but they want it to be done properly. And I think the land use departments, the zonings in each county, they're responding to who they hear from the most. And they're very intimately, and I don't mean that in a bad way, but intimately involved with the developers because they have to be. Unfortunately, they don't hear from the public as much. And even though there's outreach to the public, it doesn't get to the public in so many of the cases, or you're finding out about it way, way late in the process. The one issue I mentioned at the beginning, the 300-foot notice, if they're going to rezone areas around your area that you live, a 300-foot notice doesn't even begin to cut it. That's an area in Newcastle County, and it's maybe the same in Sussex and Kent, that needs change. If it costs more money to notify more people, make it so. It needs to be. And the zoning codes, the one that's the biggest gap for us, and I don't know how many people down here are aware of it, but the warehouses, when they put the warehouse under business park many, many years ago, it was the old warehouses that you saw, like a Napa Auto Parts, had a little storage area behind there for their inventory. The warehouses now are millions of square feet, hundreds to thousands of trucks a day coming in and out of those centers 24 hours a day, large amounts of pollution with the trucks just idling, the lights. In Newcastle County, whether it's a little teeny Napa warehouse or these mega warehouse logistics centers, they're all under one zoning category. We didn't have these big warehouses back 20, 30 years ago. That is the biggest thing I think needs to change. Where Whitehall is, they're looking at it's almost 4 million square feet warehouses, logistics centers, 3 different potential complexes that are going to, if they get built, going to be right next to Whitehall. That is crazy. You shouldn't be building these.
I just want to make sure everybody knows I'm not the they.
Yeah.
I'm not the they.
He is not the they.
I was almost the they.
Yeah, I was going to say, I think Preston sold that land. Didn't he?
It is massive. There are places for these warehouses, but they need to change the code so they're a special designation. And they need to be in industrial centers, not next to people's homes. That's just wrong. And that's an area that I know will continue to fight in Newcastle County. Just as a heads up, all of these mega warehouses have popped up in Newcastle County in the last 8 years. The county executive that saw all of these happen will soon be the governor of Delaware. So don't be too surprised if there may be proposals showing up in Kent and Sussex for these mega warehouses. In the right locations and industrial centers, fine, but not in residential areas.
Jill, assessments of the current land use process?
Yes, so I think that in this last election, Sussex County voters made it very clear that they were not happy with the land use process, or particularly the codes and the ordinances that are very laxed. And I would believe that the development community, as well as the advocates, would like codes that are more specific rather than saying things like, you should consider this, or to the maximum extent possible. We all need better guidelines so that through this process, they know what to expect, and the community has had some input in that as well, and we would know what to expect. The other thing that I find troubling about Sussex County right now is that a council member has more constituents than a state senator. So Sussex County, with its large and rapidly growing population, only has 5 council members. We should have 7 to 9. Now, so I think the state and the county need to address that, especially in this rapid expansion that's taking place.
I know Representative Postles is here. Maybe he can take that up for you. Brian, your thoughts on the current land use process?
Yeah, I'm not going to really discuss any municipality in particular because I'm just not that smart or that risky. But I think it would be helpful just to revisit how Whitehall came to be entitled to do what it's doing, because I think it could shed some light on how to proceed, whether it's again in Newcastle County, because I think they're due for a refresh, or whether it's something to be emulated in Sussex County. But some 20 plus years ago, Newcastle County, I believe we just hit the spot at the right time. What I mean by that is that, coming out of the 80s real estate boom, the community in Newcastle County found itself with really despising the just miles and miles of strip shopping centers and the sort of nameless, faceless, felt like soulless subdivisions where people weren't connected. And so at that particular time that we arrived on the scene, Newcastle County felt compelled, Newcastle County not as a government, but just the populace felt compelled to do something different. And whether it was, Chuck Buholland and the Southern Newcastle County Alliance or the CCOBH, everybody was fighting. Not necessarily not knowing what they were fighting, they were just not happy, and they wanted something different. So the Newcastle County Chamber converged a meeting with the Chamber, business leaders, Newcastle County, who at the time was very enlightened, led by a guy by the name of Dave Culver, and the county executive was a guy by the name of Chris Coons. And they decided that they just wanted something different. And so we at Whitehall, with the philanthropy, wanted something that was a legacy builder for this philanthropy. And so we said, why don't we, rather than try to fight our way through this, why doesn't the county tell us what they want? And we'll just respond to the code. We'll deliver a by right plan. If the constituents of Southern Newcastle County and the county at large would just tell us what you want. And so they went about creating an enabling code that worked backwards to help solve some problems, to connect people, to connect the commercial, the people with the commercial zones. At Whitehall in particular, if you took our acreage, which at the time was about 2,000 acres, we were set to remove about 20 million vehicular miles off the roads every year. And we reduced the amount of development that were required by about 900 acres by creating, our density is modest. Ours is 5 to 7 units per acre. We should be getting 10 to 15 per acre, we believe. the best communities around the nation, they're beautiful, they're vibrant, they're lively, they're prosperous, are in the 10, 12, 15 unit per acre category. And that's how you solve for affordable housing, that's how you solve for healthcare, and the list goes on. And so I believe, like, I'm not going to sit here and give a piece of code that should be changed. I think it's philosophical. I think we, whether it's the county, whether it's a city, whatever the municipality is, needs to step back and ask the question, what problems do we want to solve? I think in Sussex County, I mean, it's very much like it's Newcastle County. The traffic is an issue, right? It's going to be an issue everywhere. And especially in our two counties, and probably the same in Kent, affordable housing. And we're not going to solve the affordable housing crisis if we don't figure out how to allow for more density, create more connectivity. Like, I'd love to sit here and talk about, you know, how do we create financial incentives, but I think they're important, but I don't think until we get to the philosophical pieces of density and connectivity, layering the financial incentives I think is tertiary.
I think you have to add one more consideration into that, and especially for Sussex County and the state of Delaware, being the lowest lying state in the nation, you have to factor into that your natural resources, your natural environment, saving your forest canopy. They have so much value that, and I know I don't have to explain it to this group, but also, so we need, particularly in Sussex County, we need a conservation plan. We need a forest preservation plan. We need ordinances and protections around our wetlands. And you can do all that without sacrificing density.
No, I think, you know, if I
But you have to include it. That's part of the infrastructure.
I think perhaps maybe you can do it because of density.
Yeah, I think,
Done,
you know,
right, yes.
Yeah, we completely agree. And the comment about connectivity, you know, again, the philosophy, and I don't want to get too geeky here, but the philosophy of connectivity at Whitehall is within 5 minutes, every human should be able to connect to something of benefit, whether it's education, commerce, or nature. I mean, the Morse Foundation did a study in Newcastle County that discovered that 91% of Delawareans would like to be able to walk or bike to nature of some sort. But at the time, only about 10% of people could. And so, you know, until we figure out how to solve that problem, in addition to allowing for the growth that is important, you know, I don't think we're doing ourselves any service. So
yeah,
we would agree.
If you don't increase density, you are going to eat up every square acre there is in the state. So increasing density instead of the large 1, 2, 3, 4 acre land houses has got to be the way to go. It'll provide the better housing for all people. It'll be the walkable communities on tighter areas. That's got to be part of the solution.
Which is why he's building condos. Preston, your thought?
We have consensus here. We all think
We said there was more in common than
in
we
level
thought.
1 and level 2, when the infrastructure is present and allows for it, greater density is a good thing. And mixed use of housing types. So to get to your question, I actually like plus. I'm one of the
few. David, you've got a fan.
I've had 2 projects that I scuttled because of things I learned at plus. I also like plus because I check it every month to see what everybody's up to. It's like the first way for a developer to see what's going on and who's doing what. And sometimes leads me to not do something like, oh, he's already doing this type of project in that location. They're kind of first to the table on that. We don't need 2 of those types of projects in that location, so I'll back off on the one that we were pursuing. It is heartwarming to hear density, and it's actually heartwarming to see that the advocates are as educated and as willing to get involved in the process at the right period of time, which is in the writing of the code and the updates to the comprehensive land use plan. Just showing up at our hearings and getting up and saying traffic, 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 and blah, blah, blah. If I've got something that's by right, that's really not going to do much. But modifying, and I really liked what Jill said about we got to tell the developers what they can do. The thing that would scare me to death is if the advocates get involved and try to make it a process where the developer can't get to green, can't get to what are your codes? I want to adhere to the codes. if the language is ambiguous, which it is right now, saying things like to the best ability possible and stuff like that, but creating things that say have to save all trees. Don't say what percentage. And then, as Jill said, if you can say, well, look, if you go out of your way to save a higher percentage of the old growth forest on your site, we'll actually let you go down from 7,500 square foot minimum lot size to 5,000 square foot minimum lot size, and you won't lose density. Another thing that could change, the one thing I hate about what's going on right now in the process is just sitting there submitting to Sussex County and waiting. That inefficiency does nothing for anybody. It doesn't allow the developers to respond to the market. What'll happen sometimes is that process will take 2.5, 3 years to get through the entire process. You don't wait for the county for 2.5, 3 years. You wait for the county for maybe 15, 16 months. But the market can change, and so you come to the market with a project where you almost want to raise your hand and be like, hey, look, this seemed like a great idea 3 years ago, but right now it seems like a horrendous idea, but I'm in it. Like, I got X amount of dollars into it, and I don't really have a choice. So that, like, slowing things down for the sake of addressing the anti-development sentiment doesn't help. Change things if you want to address the anti-development sentiment. Get the comprehensive land use plan saying the things you want it to do. And before I stop, I do want to say one thing. Whitehall is an amazing project. Whitehall, the reason guys like me don't do it is because it's so hard. Projects like Whitehall take forever to get traction. It's a chicken and egg problem. We can't really sell the vision if we don't have the commercial, and the commercial guys are saying to you, you don't really have the households and the density for me to really support the commercials, so you have to subsidize it. But I can tell you, if you have an entity that has staying power like these guys have, you will want to live. In 10 to 15 years, Whitehall will hold its value. Whitehall will appreciate faster than non-walkable communities, and it will be a place you want to live in. The problem is, you got to get the 500 homeowners to kind of take that leap of faith early, and that's the toughest part about those types of projects, and it's really hard. So I feel for guys like Brian trying to do Whitehall. It's too hard for us. Like, we did little mini versions of it at Painter's Mill, and we were involved in Villages of 5 Points. The Painter's Mill retail really has never worked. And so it's not that we don't do it because we don't think it's a great type of land use. We don't do it because it's really, really hard, and it takes forever. If you just do, half-acre lots or quarter-acre lots and sell them to retirees moving down to the beach, that's really easy, and that's why developers are doing that.
I think that if you talk to the team at Blenheim and Jay at the Bayberry project, they tell you the same thing. When my family moved to Middletown 7 years ago, the commercial's coming next year. It's still not there. They're still waiting, and it's largely because of that chicken and egg problem. I do want to save time for questions from the audience. Anybody have a question for our esteemed development advocacy panel?
Rich Barrasso with Sussex Preservation Coalition. 3 years ago, DelDOT presented their infrastructure improvements from the Nassau Bridge up to the Kent County line 22 miles. To both Brian and Preston, right now, every acre that's east of Route 1, where they're going to spend $500 million, what are your expectations of Sussex County Council and Planning and Zoning to plan for the future? There'll be several separated grades along that stretch of 22 miles. I know how important predictability is for you. What type of long-range planning are you expecting of the county to help determine if there's opportunities for you, at the same time, not lose the capacity that they're building in?
I'm not really sure I totally understand your question, but I'm going to try to answer it. I think the county, and I think this is in the most recent updated comprehensive land use plan, has said that east of Route 1 in that corridor, they are not in favor of heavy development. That doesn't mean you can't take a farmer who owns 200 acres owned AR1 and say, hey, we just decided your land's only farmland now. You can't ever develop it. Trust me, if you could do that, if you could go back to 1974, and instead of giving every farmer 2 units per acre by right, give them 1 unit per 10 acres by right, we could solve 90% of the issues we deal with in Sussex County. And quite frankly, no one would have cared in 1974. Most landowners didn't think their land had a lot of development value anyway. The problem is once you establish that and the value is based on that, and that farmer's gone off and borrowed money because they've had a couple tough 2 years based on the development value of their property, you can't tell that farmer, oh, I'm sorry, we've changed our mind. Now it's 1 unit for every 10 acres. And so you can't kind of take away. You can make it harder to develop that property. You can put more code stipulations in that make it harder, but you can't really take away that ability to develop that property. I'm personally not a big, with the exception of like the corridors going into Lewis and in Rehoboth, I don't really want to do, I just bought 347 acres east of Route 1, and it's for preservation. Like, we're not going to develop it. We bought it for the sake of preservation, and it doesn't have a conservation easement on it, but it'll never be developed. I'm on the county's side, and I know not every county council person sees it this way, but I think that that area is more appropriate. Like, that's where the nature conservancies, the Sussex County Land Trusts, should be looking at identifying properties for preservation in that area. Having said that, certain farmers wanted, like, there's a proposal that just came through right near Painter's Mill on the other side, and that was where the big shopping center was going to be. That's probably a better alternative to the big shopping center, but I'm not sure how you tell that property owner and now that developer, which I'm neither, by the way, that they can't do it. It's really tough. It's a really tough position for the county to be in right now.
Boy, I am way out over my skis on this one because it's not a territory that we really trade in as developers. And I don't know what kind of work has been done in conjunction with DelDOT's work already. But I would just suggest that everybody takes their time and steps back and just asks the question, what do we want this to look like in 50 years? And we've learned so much over the past 50 years. There's some things that have evolved regardless of the municipality that we love. And there's some things that we've done that we don't love. And I think if we recognize that once we do things physically, we can never undo them in our lifetimes, right? We sort of have one shot at a lot of these things. So I think just taking the time and have a vision, have a consensus, and just get some generalities of where we want to go. And I know this is apples and oranges, but it's something that I thought that was done really well, and that is when Senator Carper was governor. I think the best thing that he did for the city of Wilmington was to do what he called the Vision for the Rivers exercise, where he engaged architects, engineers, developers, constituents of the community to just get crazy and take the Brandywine and Christina rivers and draw whatever your heart desires. And let's see what Wilmington could be 50, 100 years from now. Now, none of that stuff is actually being built, but it began to allow people to imagine what could be and what the roadblocks would be and the things that we shouldn't do. And so I think having that sort of philosophical exercise of what do we want this to look back on, and what have we learned over the past 50 years that we shouldn't repeat, and what have we done over the past 50 years that we should double down on.
Just to add to that, one of the good things that passed in state legislation is that when we do write the comprehensive plan, I think we now have to take climate change and the impact of climate change into writing that comprehensive plan. So when you talk about what are we going to look like in the next 50 years, we have to think about what is sea level rise going to do to the coast? Excuse me. What is it going to do to its tributaries? How are we going to correct the problem that we have in our waterways now, where I think 87% of them are impaired and fail? So when we look out that 50 years, it's not just about, how are we going to look as a development or a building standpoint. We have to look at first and say, what is it going to look like when the impacts of climate change and sea level rise hit us, particularly if we don't do anything between now and then.
One more.
Sorry, this actually isn't a question, it's a plug. My name is Caitlin Del Calo. I am Chief Strategy Advisor for Delaware State Housing Authority, and I staff the Affordable Housing Production Task Force. The task force was created by state legislation in June for the purpose of informing our incoming gubernatorial administration and the next General Assembly on how the state and local governments can increase the supply of housing that is affordable to households across the income spectrum. I want to acknowledge that there are at least 5 full task force and subcommittee members present today, including Preston, including David Edgell, Karen Speakman, John Horner, Sheila Grant. There may be folks behind me that I'm missing. I invite everybody that is here today to participate in those meetings. They are all open to the public. They are all conducted in hybrid format. All of the meetings are recorded. Our website has the recordings of every meeting that has taken place thus far. So I just want to make sure that if to the extent that the folks in this room care about the intersection between land use and housing, please come to these meetings. Please participate in the public comment process because this is going to inform hopefully what our next governor is going to do vis-a-vis affordable housing. Thank you.
Kudos to Caitlin and the transparency on making those meetings available and recorded. I think that's what we've got time for. We got Ann in the back. Quick question from Ann.
Thanks, Jake. Ann Canby, you may remember decades ago, I led some place called DelDOT. Anyway, I'm delighted to hear the talk about density. What I think is missing is the continued assumption that our car is going to be the main form of transportation. Transit, how do we get people to think that transit is a cool thing for everybody? I don't think we have that attitude in the state right now. Brian talked about going to great places on vacation, and you can hop on a light rail line or a BRT or whatever, and you never have to get in your car. So that's a challenge that I think we all have to confront. As we talk about more density, how do we bring the shift in the transportation mindset in this state to be much more transit, walk, bike, ped, all that?
I'd echo those thoughts, and I know Brian in particular has been pretty outspoken on multimodal and bike lanes and trying to, it may not be that buses are the answer here in Delaware, but I think bicycles and, hoverboards and anything else that you see these days very much could be an answer, which is why communities, expensive, difficult communities like Whitehall are so important to the future. If everybody could give me a round of applause for the 4 panelists here today. And I'll take you guys off the hot seat and turn the mic over to our founder and CEO, Allison Taylor Levine.
Thank you all. That was fantastic and fascinating, and I have learned so much about land use and the processes today. I never thought planning and zoning would be so fascinating, but there it is. So thank you to all of the panelists on both of our sessions and to Nick and Jake for doing such a great job guiding these complicated discussions. I wanted to share with you just a couple of thoughts about things that I've learned, things that I heard today. The big thing that I'm taking away today is that all of us are very, very passionate about and committed to quality of life in Delaware, from the advocates to our government officials to our developers. I just hear a lot of passion for quality of life, which is including different types of housing, walkable communities, and access. I think it was Brian who kind of put it in a nutshell for me, access to education, commerce, and nature. That makes a lot of sense to me. And I also hear density. Density, we kind of all are aligned that density is a path to that. So also, though, I'm hearing this is really complicated. This is really hard stuff. It's hard, I think, for lay people particularly to identify where and how to have an impact on land use decisions. One of the things that we heard during our research throughout the state was, who the hell are these people making these decisions, and why is it too late by the time we find out? And I feel like today I got an answer to that, that we are all agreeing that it needs to be in the zoning, that's where I heard a lot of that is happening. And civic engagement is just hard work, right? We're grateful to have folks who are experts in these decisions, in these policies and processes on all sides from all different perspectives. I also heard that it sounds like we have some alignment, that there are some opportunities for improvement to our code and to our processes that would help streamline and clarify some of those things to help us modify our code to encourage density. And that may be another conversation for another day about if we're all aligned around that, how can we advance that conversation? And also to continue to increase the public's understanding and transparency into these challenges, which is part of the work of Spotlight Delaware, and I think it's incumbent on all of us to continue to work on that. So whatever you took away from today's event, I hope that it does empower you in some way to become more effectively involved in land use decisions in your community. And bear with me, I have 5 quick things I want to share with you. One is that if you found today useful, I hope that you will consider becoming a founding member of Spotlight Delaware by making a donation of any size at spotlightdelaware.org. It can be as little as a dollar or as much as $1 million if you want to. If you purchased a ticket for today, you are already on our newsletter mailing list. If you did not purchase a ticket for today, please sign up at spotlightdelaware.org so that you start getting our information, which is now 3 days a week and going to 5 days a week in the new year. Number 3, we'd be very grateful if you would fill out a survey about today's program. You can scan the QR code on the screen. There it is. See how good my team is? I'm like, I just show up and read what I'm told to read, and there it is. There's the QR code. And you'll get a follow-up email with a survey link for that, and that'll help us in planning future events. Number 4, our next event is right around the corner. On January 8th, we'll be presenting Spotlight Delaware Legislative Summit. This event is Jake's brainchild, and it's something he has been wanting to hold in Delaware for over a decade. We are lining up legislative leadership and community advocates to talk about the opportunities and challenges of the 2025 legislative year. And that will be at Delaware State University in Dover. And you can scan the QR code on the back of your program for tickets to that. And the 5th and final thing is please drop your name tags at the check-in desk on your way out so that we can reuse them. Thank you all again for being here today, and safe travels to wherever you're headed. Thank you.